March 8, 2014, 11:19 a.m. The voice is calm. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, acknowledging the handoff from Kuala Lumpur. Radar to Ho Chi Minh Control. It's routine, the kind of transmission pilots make thousands of times in their careers. 102 seconds later, the Boeing 77 vanishes from radar. Not because it crashed. Someone turned off the transponder. For 12 years, the world has asked what happened in those 102 seconds. And beneath that question sits another, more disturbing one. Did the man who said goodnight already know he was never going to land? MH370 has been analyzed from every angle, except one that still makes people uncomfortable. The captain. Let's start with what everyone agrees on. Zahari Ahmad Shah joined Malaysia Airlines in 1981 as a cadet pilot. Fresh out of flight school in the Philippines, 20 years old, second youngest of 9 siblings from a poor family in Penang. Aviation was his way out, his dream, and he made it real. By 2014, he's logged 18,365 flight music hours, 33 years with the airline. He's been a typewriting instructor on the Boeing 77 since 2007, meaning he doesn't just fly the aircraft, he teaches other pilots how to fly it. Even his friend said, when the airline needs someone to evaluate a captain's skills, they send Zahari. Captain Zahari is definitely a very committed professional pilot. He lives in Lamansari, a gated community in Shah Alam, in a house worth roughly £500,000. He's been married to Faizar Khan for more than 30 years. 3 children, 2 sons, a daughter, even grandchildren. In his home, he's built an elaborate flight simulator. 3 large monitors, yoke, throttle quadrant, rudder pedals. He uses Microsoft Flight Simulator with add-on aircraft. On YouTube, he uploads repair videos. How to fix an air conditioner. How to repair a refrigerator ice maker. The content of a man who enjoys solving problems. 2 weeks before March 8th, he has lunch with his family. His sister Sakinab will later describe him as his normal self, joking around. Nothing strange. By every outward measure, Zahari Ahmad Shah is stable, successful, content. And then his plane disappears and investigators start looking deeper. The night before March 7th, 2014, the Malaysian Court of Appeal overturns an earlier acquittal sentences opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim to 5 years in prison on sodomy charges. The charges are widely viewed as politically motivated tools the ruling party uses to sideline its most prominent opponent. Anwar Ibrahim isn't just any politician. He's the de facto leader of the People's Justice Party, a coalition that nearly unseated the government in the previous election. He represents multi-ethnic Malaysia, democratic reform, an alternative to decades of one-party rule. And Zahari is a supporter, not quietly. On Facebook, he's vocal. In April 2013, leading up to elections, he posts 119 times, most of them criticizing Prime Minister Najib Razak, whom he calls after the ruling party wins. Despite losing the popular vote, Zahari writes, "There is a rebel in each and every one of us. Let it out." On March 7th, witnesses report seeing Zahari at the courthouse when Anwar's sentence is announced. Hours later, he reports for duty. Flight MH370 to Beijing. Does the court ruling matter? Does it explain anything? Some will argue it's the trigger. Others will say it's irrelevant. Anwar had faced charges before. This was nothing new. Anwar himself will later dismiss the idea, saying, "I believe 90% of taxi drivers support me, but they did not hijack their taxis." But the timing is undeniable. The conviction happens, the flight departs, and then the disappearance began. What makes this night different is what investigators will find on Zahari's computer. Evidence that suggests this wasn't sudden at all. After MH370 disappears, Malaysian police search Zahari's home. They seize the flight simulator. The hard drive is sent to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. On March 19, 2014, 11 days after the disappearance, Malaysian officials announced that files on the simulator had been deleted. On February 3rd, just over a month before the flight, the FBI recovers them. What they find stays quiet for 2 years. Then in July 2016, New York Magazine obtains a confidential Malaysian police document and publishes excerpts. The document describes a simulated flight conducted on February 2, 2014. The flight begins at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. It follows a route northwest up the Malacca Strait past the northern tip of Sumatra. Then it turns south. The simulation continues deep into the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote stretches of water on Earth. The final data points show the aircraft at extremely low altitude, far from any land with fuel exhausted. The route matches almost exactly the projected path investigators believe MH370 took. New York Magazine writes, "The revelation which Malaysia withheld from a lengthy public report on the investigation is the strongest evidence yet that Zahari made off with the plane in a premeditated act of mass murder-suicide." Music. When this becomes public, the Malaysian government shifts its story. Initially in 2014, a senior U.S. official told ABC News, "They have finished with the simulator. There is nothing suspicious whatsoever." Now, in 2016, Malaysian officials acknowledge the simulation, but downplay it. They call it routine, not unusual, possibly just Zahari experimenting with different routes. But the Australian Transport Safety Bureau's 2017 report confirms that the simulator data was considered relevant evidence in defining the search area. In other words, investigators took it seriously. The data shows Zahari practiced a flight into the southern Indian Ocean, ending in fuel exhaustion 5 weeks before MH370 disappeared under nearly identical circumstances. February 2, 2014 was the Sunday Zahari is on a rostered day off. 2 days later, on February 4th, he's scheduled to fly MH370 from Kuala Lumpur to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The simulator session appears to begin as a practice run for that flight. The first data points recovered by the FBI show the aircraft departing Kuala Lumpur and heading northwest along Airway N571, the standard route toward the Middle East. But then the simulated flight diverges. Instead of continuing to Jeddah, it turns south. It follows waypoints Vampi, Mecca, Nam, Igu, Lagog, Dotan. Then it leaves controlled airspace entirely, tracking a great circle route toward the remote southern Indian Ocean. At one point, investigators note a manual altitude change, dropping from 37,654 feet to 4,000 feet in the simulation. The session ends with the aircraft over open ocean, fuel at zero. Why would a pilot simulate this? One theory, he's practicing an emergency scenario, engine out glide, ditching at sea, something educational. But the route doesn't support that. There's no nearby airport in the simulation, no attempt to return to land. The flight simply ends. The forensic analysis concludes that Zahari manually repositioned the aircraft between save points, meaning he wasn't flying the full route in real time. He was testing specific locations, experimenting with endpoints. The simulation is not a continuous flight. It's a series of checkpoints leading to a final position in the middle of nowhere. Independent analysts will later attempt to reconstruct the exact location. Some suggest the final coordinates align with a path toward McMurdo Station, Antarctica, though the aircraft would never reach it. Others note that the route stays well clear of Indonesian airspace, minimizing the chance of military intercept. It's music, a route designed to vanish. And 5 weeks later, MH370 follows it. But to understand why this matters so much, we need to look at the man behind the simulation and the cracks that may have been forming beneath the surface. The Facebook obsession. In 2013, the year before, MH370 Zahari leaves over 100 comments on the Facebook page of Kiminan, a 26-year-old Malaysian model. Kiminan and her twin sister, Lanchi Hui, are Instagram music models with a combined 100,000 followers. They're 34 years younger than Zahari. Most of his messages go unanswered. The comments range from awkward to inappropriate. When Kim In-lan posts a photo in a bathrobe, Zahari comments, "Just shower." Repeatedly, he asks them to visit Kuala Lumpur, where he lives with his wife. When in Kuala Lumpur? How about Kuala Lumpur? Police will later question Keelan after MH370 disappears. Her response, "Police know. I don't know him at all. He's just a social network fan of mine. I have many followers. He's one of them. The pilot didn't disturb my life because I didn't reply to him at all." Psychologists reviewing the pattern call it evidence of self-destructive tendencies. Still, it raises a question. Was there something happening beneath the surface that no one else could see? The marriage question. Some reports claim Zahari's wife and children moved out of the family home the day before the flight. His brother-in-law, Asad Khan, denies this. He insists the family was intact, that reports of separation are false. A lifelong friend, a fellow Boeing 77 pilot who refuses to give his name, tells a different story. He describes Zahari's marriage as bad, says Zahari had affairs with flight attendants over the years, adds, "And so what? We all do. You're flying all over the world with these beautiful girls in the back." But then the friend says something else. Zahari was terribly upset that his marriage was falling apart. It's impossible to verify. Family members defend him. Official reports find no evidence of distress. Someone is lying or someone is protecting a reputation. Either way, the picture is no longer clean. And there's one more piece that doesn't quite fit. February 2nd, 2014. The same day Zahari runs the simulator session, he makes a 45-minute phone call to his cousin, Zulhimi bin Wahidin. Solheim is an aircraft engineer also, employed by Malaysia Airlines with decades of experience on Boeing systems. Solheim will later describe the call as routine, just catching up. Nothing unusual. But investigators note the timing. A 45-minute conversation with an engineer who specializes in Boeing systems on the same day he simulates a flight into the Indian Ocean. Is it coincidence or is it consultation? We'll never know. But the pattern keeps building. Zahari's family rejects the entire narrative. His sister Sakinab Shah becomes his most vocal defender. She gives interviews to CNN. Please do not judge him based on theories. Don't blame him unless there is evidence. She describes her brother as loving, generous, passionate about his work. A man who dreamed of flying since childhood, who built a career through hard work. He stayed with Malaysia Airlines for 30 years. Recorded over 18,000 hours of flying time. He was just a few years from retirement. Do you think he would want to throw this all away? If Zahari ran simulations in early 2014, it may have been to test repairs, not to plan a hijacking. If there was anything incriminating, the police would be the first to know. The Malaysian Safety Investigation Report released in July 2018 supports this. Lead investigator Cox Such Chan states, "We have examined the pilot and the first officer, and we are quite satisfied with their background, training, music, and mental health." The official report clears her brother, but the report also omits key evidence. It doesn't mention the simulator route in detail. It doesn't address the deleted files. It doesn't explain the FBI findings. Critics argue the Malaysian government is protecting the national airline, avoiding liability, shielding the country's reputation. But the question remains, if Zahari is innocent, then what happened on March 8th? To answer that, we need to go back to the last normal moments of flight MH370. After MH370 takes off as planned at 12:42 a.m., everything looks normal. At 12:46, Kuala Lumpur radar establishes contact. The flight is cleared to climb to flight level 350, 35,000 feet, Zahari acknowledges. The aircraft follows its programmed route northeast, tracking airway N571 across the South China Sea toward Vietnam. It's one of the busiest air corridors in Southeast Asia. MH370 is just another blip on the radar screen. At 1:01, the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, AARS, sends its last automated position report. The message includes altitude, speed, heading, and fuel quantity. 43,800 kilograms remaining. Ours is designed to transmit every 30 minutes. Around 1:07, Farik makes a routine radio call, acknowledging a frequency change. His voice is calm, no stress, no indication of anything wrong. At around 1:19 a.m., the flight is approaching waypoint, the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. Kuala Lumpur radar hands them off to Ho Chi Minh Control. Malaysian 370, contact 12.9, good night. It's the last transmission anyone hears from the cockpit. Voice analysis later confirms it's Zahari speaking, not Farik. His tone is normal. 17 seconds later, the transponder stops transmitting. And from that moment, nothing will ever be normal again. At around 1:21 a.m., on civilian radar screens, MH370's identifier, its flight number, altitude, speed disappears. The aircraft is still visible as a primary radar return. A blip with no data attached, but only to military radar, which tracks all aircraft regardless of transponder status. Civilian controllers in Ho Chi Minh City expect MH370 to check in on their frequency within a minute or two of the handoff. They wait. No call comes. They try reaching the flight. No response. At this point, standard procedure would be to escalate immediately, alert authorities, declare an emergency, coordinate search and rescue. But confusion delays the response. Kuala Lumpur radar assumes the flight checked in with Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh assumes the flight is still with Kuala Lumpur. It takes 18 minutes before anyone realizes the plane is truly unresponsive. By then, MH370 is no longer where it's supposed to be. At waypoint Igari, where the transponder goes dark, the aircraft makes a turn. Not a gentle course adjustment, a sharp, deliberate left turn. The turn is so precise that it suggests someone in the cockpit manually flew it at the exact moment the transponder was switched off. The aircraft reverses direction, tracking southwest back across the Malay Peninsula. This is not a route to Beijing. This is not a diversion to an alternate airport. This is a flight path that takes MH370 away from its destination, away from controlled airspace, away from help. Malaysian military radar picks up the track. The radar operators see it. They note it in logs. Later, officials will claim they assumed it was a friendly aircraft on a planned route. The explanation doesn't hold. The flight crosses Malaysian airspace without clearance, without communication, without a transponder, but the military does nothing. The aircraft continues southwest. At some point during this phase, someone also disables ACARS. The system that should automatically report position every 30 minutes goes silent. But the aircraft's satellite communication system, SATCOM, remains active, and every hour it sends a handshake ping to an Inmarsat satellite over the Indian Ocean, confirming the connection is alive. These pings don't contain position data, but engineers can analyze the signal's frequency shift caused by the Doppler effect as the aircraft moves relative to the satellite, and calculate rough arcs of possible locations. That data will later become the only clue to where MH370 went. But first, something else happens. Something that may explain why no one on board ever called for help. The depressurization theory. Somewhere between 1:21 and 2 a.m., something happens inside the cabin. No one will ever know exactly what, but the most consistent explanation, the one that fits every known fact, is this. The aircraft climbs, not to its assigned cruise altitude of 35,000 feet higher. Electrical engineer Mike Exner, analyzing radar data and aircraft performance, concludes the plane likely climbed to 40,000 feet, shortly after the turn at Igari. At 40,000 feet, the air's thin. Breathable oxygen is almost non-existent. Time of useful consciousness. The window in which a person can think and act before losing the ability to function is 5 to 10 seconds without supplemental oxygen. If the cabin depressurizes at that altitude, anyone not wearing an oxygen mask will be unconscious within a minute, dead within 15 to 20 minutes. Here's how it works. Modern airliners pressurize the cabin by bleeding compressed air from the engines and pumping it into the fuselage. As the plane climbs into thin air, the pressurization system keeps the cabin at a comfortable equivalent altitude, usually around 6,000 to 8,000 feet, like being in Denver. But on the 777, the pilots can manually control cabin pressure. They can open outflow valves. They can stop the pressurization entirely. If someone in the cockpit wanted to incapacitate everyone in the cabin, depressurization is the simplest method. Climb to 40,000 feet. Open the outflow valves. The cabin altitude rises rapidly. Oxygen masks drop automatically from the ceiling. The passengers put them on. But here's the problem. Those masks only provide 12 to 15 minutes of oxygen. They're designed for one scenario, emergency descent. The idea is that if the cabin loses pressure, the masks give passengers enough air to stay conscious while the pilots descend the aircraft below 10,000 feet, where the ambient air is breathable again. If the aircraft doesn't descend, the masks run out. And when they run out, everyone without a backup oxygen source loses consciousness. In the cockpit, it's different. The flight crew has access to pressurized oxygen masks connected to dedicated bottles. These masks provide hours of oxygen, enough to sustain consciousness for the entire flight. If Zahari put on his mask, and no one else in the cockpit did, he could depressurize the cabin and remain the only conscious person on the aircraft. The passengers would never know what was happening. Hypoxia doesn't feel like suffocation. It feels like calm, like fading. Within 20 minutes, everyone in the cabin would be dead, and Zahari would be alone. This isn't theoretical. The same kind of thing has already happened before. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 took off from Cyprus, bound for Athens. A maintenance error left the pressurization system in manual mode. The crew didn't catch it during pre-flight checks. As the aircraft climbed, the cabin failed to pressurize. The crew became confused, then hypoxic, then incapacitated. The plane continued on autopilot for more than 2 hours, circling Athens in a holding pattern, while everyone on board slowly lost consciousness. Greek F-16 fighters intercepted the aircraft. The pilots looked into the cockpit and saw the crew slumped over the controls. Eventually, the plane ran out of fuel and crashed into a hillside. 121 people died, but Helios was an accident, a mistake. MH370 was not. The difference is control. Helios wandered. MH370 followed a precise route, executing turns at specific waypoints, avoiding radar coverage, flying for 7 hours with deliberate intent. Someone was awake. Someone was flying. And if the depressurization theory is correct, that someone was probably Zahari. But flying where and why? 2 o'clock in the morning to 8:19 in the morning. For 6 hours and 19 minutes, MH370 flies south. No radio calls, no distress signals, no deviation from its programmed path. At some point, the aircraft crosses the northern tip of Sumatra and enters the open expanse of the Indian Ocean. Radar coverage ends. The only tracking comes from the satellite pings, one every hour, recording the fact that the aircraft is still airborne, still moving, still connected to the network. 211, 311, 411. Each ping is analyzed later by engineers at Inmarsat, the British satellite company. Using the frequency shift of the signals, they calculate arcs, curved lines representing all the possible locations the aircraft could be at each ping. The arcs stretch across thousands of kilometers. But the pattern is clear. The plane is moving south, deeper into one of the most remote regions on Earth. There are no islands, no airports, no shipping lanes, just water. By 5:11, the sun rises over the Indian Ocean. Dawn light fills the cockpit. If Zahari is still conscious, still at the controls, what is he thinking? Does he regret it? Does he feel peace? Does he even care? We will never know. 611-711. At some point during this period, investigators believe the aircraft may have entered a holding pattern near the coast of Sumatra, flying in circles for 22 minutes before continuing south. Why? Waiting for something, saying goodbye to the land he can see below, delaying the inevitable. No one knows. 811. This is the last full ping. The satellite receives a complete handshake, confirming the aircraft is still flying, still transmitting. 8:19 in the morning, the final signal. It's not a complete handshake, it's a partial loon request, suggesting the aircraft satellite system rebooted. This is consistent with fuel exhaustion. When the engines flame out, electrical power drops briefly before backup systems activate. The satellite unit resets, tries to reconnect, sends a partial signal, and then nothing. No more pings, no more signals. The aircraft has run out of fuel. At 35,000 feet with no engine power, a Boeing 77 becomes a glider. But it's a heavy glider, and the glide ratio is finite. Without thrust, it descends fast. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, far from any land, MH370 impacts the water. 239 people disappear beneath the waves. For more than a year, nothing surfaces. Search ships come 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. They find nothing. Then on July 29, 2015, a man walking on a beach on Reunion Island, a French territory east of Madagascar, finds a piece of debris. It's a flaperon, a control surface from an aircraft wing. Investigators confirm it's from a Boeing 77. Serial numbers match. It came from MH370. Over the next 2 years, more debris washes ashore. A section of flap, engine cowling, interior panels, seat cushions. More than 30 pieces are found scattered across the western Indian Ocean. Only 3 are conclusively confirmed as MH370. But even these fragments tell a story. The flaperon shows clean breaks along the trailing edge, minimal damage to the leading edge. Aviation experts disagree on what this means. Some, like Canadian investigator Larry Vance, argue it's evidence of a controlled ditching. Zahari trying to land a plane on the water, extending flaps to slow down, managing the impact. Others, including the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, say the flaps were not deployed at impact. The damage pattern suggests a high-speed, uncontrolled descent. If the ATSB is right, it means Zahari was not flying the plane at the end. Maybe he was unconscious. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he set the autopilot and walked away. If Vance is right, it means Zahari flew the aircraft all the way to the ocean, trying to control the crash, trying to sink the plane intact so it would never be found. The problem with certainty is that it requires proof. And in the case of MH370, proof is 4,000 meters below the surface of the Indian Ocean, locked inside 2 orange boxes that may never be recovered. Without the black boxes, everything is inference, pattern recognition, probability. The simulator data points one direction. The deliberate system shutdown points the same way. The 7-hour flight into nowhere supports it. But what if there's another explanation? These are the alternative theories. All of them matter because if even one is correct, then Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah died a victim, not a perpetrator. Theory 1, mechanical failure, a fire, an electrical failure, a catastrophic malfunction that incapacitated the crew and disabled communication systems. Alistair Rosenshine, a former Royal Air Force pilot with thousands of hours on large aircraft, is the most prominent advocate of this theory. His scenario, an oxygen cylinder in the forward cargo hold or electronics bay explodes. The explosion causes rapid decompression. Electrical systems are damaged. Smoke fills the cockpit. The pilots, struggling to see and breathe, execute an emergency turn back toward Kuala Lumpur, the nearest suitable airport. They're trying to get the plane on the ground as quickly as possible. But before they can complete the turn, hypoxia sets in. They lose consciousness. The aircraft, still on autopilot, continues along the heading it was last commanded to fly. The evidence for this theory, the turn at Igari, happens shortly after the last radio call. If the crew was responding to an emergency, an immediate turnback makes sense. The aircraft follows known airways, Vampi, Mecca, which are standard routes a pilot would use if trying to navigate without full instrumentation. Depressurization would explain the lack of radio calls. Hypoxic pilots can't communicate. The problems, the transponder didn't fail, it was turned off. The switch is on the center pedestal in the cockpit, not something that breaks in a fire. A car's didn't fail, it was disabled. The system has to be manually deactivated through the cockpit interface. The turn at Igari is too precise. It happens at the exact moment the transponder stops. If the pilots were fighting an emergency, would they have the presence of mind and a time to turn off the transponder first? And most damning, the simulator data. If this was mechanical failure, why did Zaharie practice the exact route 5 weeks earlier? Rosenshine's theory requires too many coincidences. It's possible, but it's not probable. Theory 2. Accidental hypoxia. Christine Negroni, an aviation journalist and author of The Crash Detectives, offers a variation. She focuses on the oxygen system. On March 7, 2014, the day before the flight, maintenance records show the crew oxygen system was serviced. Routine work performed, music, thousands of times across the industry. Negroni's scenario, the oxygen bottles were serviced incorrectly. A valve wasn't opened fully. A connection wasn't sealed. The flow rate was insufficient. During the climb, the cockpit begins to depressurize. Not explosively, but gradually. The pilots don their oxygen masks, but the masks aren't delivering enough oxygen. They become hypoxic without realizing it. Hypoxia impairs judgment before it impairs motor skills. The pilots think they're thinking clearly, but they're not. They make erratic decisions. They turn the plane around trying to return, but they're already too confused to execute a coherent plan. They disable systems, the transponder Rs, not because they're trying to hide, but because their oxygen-starved brains misidentify the problem and troubleshoot the wrong things. Eventually, they lose consciousness. The plane flies on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. The evidence for this theory, hypoxic pilots often don't recognize they're in danger. It explains erratic decisions, turning the plane, disabling systems as symptoms of impaired cognition. It fits the Helios 522 precedent where hypoxia caused similar crew incapacitation. The problem's Helios 522 was a pressurization failure. The entire cabin depressurized because the system was in manual mode. MH370's music scenario would require a cockpit-only oxygen malfunction, which is far rarer. The route is too calculated. Even hypoxic music pilots don't accidentally fly a perfect great circle path into the southern Indian Ocean. And again, the simulator accidental hypoxia doesn't explain why Zaharie practiced the route beforehand. Negroni's theory is stronger than Rosenshine's, but it still requires ignoring the most damning evidence. Theory 3. Third-party hijacking. In the days after MH370 disappeared, media coverage focused on 2 passengers traveling on stolen passports. They were Iranian nationals. They had purchased tickets through a third party. Their travel patterns looked suspicious, but investigators cleared them quickly. They were asylum seekers trying to reach Europe. They had no connection to extremist groups. And then there's the question no one wants to ask out loud. Did something happen that governments don't want revealed? The flight path crossed some of the most sensitive airspace in the region. Northern Malaysia, the Strait of Malacca. Waters where military radar monitors every movement. Multiple countries, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, detected MH370 on radar after it turned back. None of them scrambled fighters. None of them issued warnings. Why? Some suggest incompetence. Radar operators didn't recognize the significance. Communication between agencies failed. Others suggest something darker. That the aircraft was tracked, monitored, and allowed to continue because intervening would have revealed military capabilities that needed to stay secret. There are whispers, unconfirmed, unverifiable, music, that MH370 was shot down by accident. A military exercise gone wrong. A missile fired at what was thought to be a threat. There's no evidence for this, but there's also no transparency. Malaysia refuses to release full military radar data. Other nations stay silent. We don't know what happened in the final moments. The black boxes are out there somewhere on the ocean floor, in water more than 4,000 meters deep. If they're found, they'll answer every question. But until then, we know this. 239 people boarded a plane. None of them came home. A Boeing 77 flew for 7 hours and 45 minutes, then vanished into the Indian Ocean. The world searched, the world mourned, the world demanded answers. And 12 years later, the answers are still out there, locked in orange boxes, waiting to be found. Until that day, Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah remains what he has always been, a person described as kind, generous, and dedicated, and a person who may have committed one of the most calculated acts of mass murder in aviation history.